Neo-Vedanta. Neo-Vedanta, also called Hindu modernism, neo-Hinduism, global Hinduism, and Hindu Universalism, are terms to characterize interpretations of Hinduism that developed in the 19th century. The term Neo-Vedanta was coined by German Indologist Paul Hacker in a pejorative way to distinguish modern developments from traditional Advaita Vedanta. Scholars have repeatedly argued that these modern interpretations incorporate Western ideas into traditional Indian religions, especially Advaita Vedanta, which is asserted as central or fundamental to Hindu culture. Other scholars have described the Greater Advaita Vedanta, which developed since the medieval period. Drawing on this broad pool of sources, after Muslim rule in India was replaced by that of the East India Company, Hindu religious and political leaders and thinkers responded to Western colonialism and orientalism, contributing to the Indian independence movement and the modern national and religious identity of Hindus in the Republic of India. This societal aspect is covered under the term of Hindu reform movements. Among the main proponents of such modern interpretations of Hinduism were Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and Radhakrishnan, who to some extent also contributed to the emergence of neo-Hindu movements in the West. Neo-Vedanta has been influential in the perception of Hinduism, both in the West and in the higher educated classes in India. It has received appraisal for its solution of synthesis, but has also been criticized for its universalism. The terms neo-Hindu or Neo-Vedanta themselves have also been criticized for its polemical usage. The prefix neo then intended to imply that these modern interpretations of Hinduism are inauthentic or in other ways problematic. Definition and etymology. According to Halbwas, the terms Neo-Vedanta and Neo-Hinduism refer to the adoption of Western concepts and standards and the readiness to reinterpret traditional ideas in light of these new, imported, and imposed modes of thought. Prominent in Neo-Vedanta is Vivekananda, whose theology, according to Madhya, is often characterized in earlier scholarship as a rupture from traditional or classical Hinduism, particularly the orthodox Advaita Vedanta of the 8th century Shankara. The term Neo-Vedanta appears to have arisen in Bengal in the 19th century, where it was used by both Indians and Europeans. Brian Hatcher wrote that the term Neo-Vedanta was first coined by Christian commentators, some of whom were first-hand observers of developments in Brahmo theology, engaged in open, sometimes acrimonious debates with the Brahmos, whom they partly admired for their courage in abandoning traditions of polytheism and image worship, but whom they also scorned for having proffered to other Hindus a viable alternative to conversion. Halbwas wrote that it seems likely that the term neo-Hinduism was invented by a Bengali, Brajendranath Seal 1864-1938, who used the term to characterize the literary work of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee 1838-1894. The term Neo-Vedanta was used by Christian missionaries as well as Hindu traditionalists to criticize the emerging ideas of the Brahmo SAMAJ, a critical usage whose polemical undertone is obvious. Ayan Maharaj regards the continued scholarly use of the term Neo-Vedanta as only a seemingly benign practice. Maharaj asserts that the term Neo-Vedanta is misleading and unhelpful for three main reasons. The term Neo-Hinduism was used by a Jesuit scholar resident in India, Robert Ant, in 1940-1981, from whom it was borrowed by Paul Hacker, who used it to demarcate these modernist ideas from surviving traditional Hinduism and treating the Neo-Vedantins as dialogue partners with the broken identity who cannot really and authentically speak for themselves and for the Indian tradition. Hacker made a distinction between Neo-Vedanta and neo-Hinduism, seeing nationalism as a prime concern of neo-Hinduism. History. Although Neo-Vedanta proper developed in the 19th century in response to Western colonialism, it has got deeper origins in the Muslim period of India. Michael S. Allen and Anand Venkat note that Shankara is very well studied, but scholars have yet to provide even a rudimentary, let alone comprehensive account of the history of Advaita Vedanta in the centuries leading up to the colonial period. Unification of Hinduism. well before the advent of British influence, with beginnings that some scholars have argued significantly predate Islamic influence. Hierarchical classifications of the various orthodox schools were developed. According to Nicholson, already between the 12th and the 16th century, the tendency of a blurring of philosophical distinctions has also been noted by Michelberly. Lorenzen locates the origins of a distinct Hindu identity in the interaction between Muslims and Hindus, and a process of mutual self-definition with a contrasting Muslim other, which started well before 1800. Both the Indian and the European thinkers who developed the term Hinduism in the 19th century were influenced by these philosophers. Within these so-called doxologies, Advaita Vedanta was given the highest position since it was regarded to be most inclusive system. Venapeksu, a 16th century philosopher and writer, is still an influential proponent of these doxologies. He's been a prime influence on 19th century Hindu modernists like Vivekananda, who also tried to integrate various strands of Hindu thought, taking Advaita Vedanta as its most representative specimen. Influence of yogic tradition. While Indologists like Paul Hacker and Wilhelm Halpas took Shankara's system as the measure for an orthodox Advaita Vedanta, the living Advaita Vedanta tradition in medieval times was influenced by and incorporated elements from the yogic tradition and texts like the Yoga Vasistha and the Bhagavata Purana. The Yoga Vasistha became an authoritative source text in the Advaita Vedanta tradition in the 14th century, while Vidyaranya's Jivamukta Viveka 14th century was influenced by the Laghu Yoga Vasistha, which in turn was influenced by Kashmir Shaivism. Vivekananda's 19th century emphasis on Nirvikalpa Samadhi was preceded by medieval yogic influences on Advaita Vedanta. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Samnath and Hatha Yoga texts also came within the scope of the developing Advaita Vedanta tradition. Company rule in India. The influence of the Islamic Mughal Empire on the Indian subcontinent was gradually replaced with that of the East India Company, leading to a new era in Indian history. Prior to the establishment of company rule, Mughal rule in northern India had a drastic effect on Hinduism and Buddhism through various acts of persecution. While Indian society was greatly impacted by Mughal rule, the Mughal economy, however, continued to remain one of the largest in the world, thanks in large part to its proto-industrialization. Muslim rule over southern India was also relatively short-lived before the 17th century. The policies of the East India Company coincided with the decline of proto-industrialization in former Mughal territories. The economic decline, caused in part by restrictive company policies in their Indian territories and the Industrial Revolution in Europe, led to the eventual dismantlement of the dominant decentralized education systems in India in the tail end of the 18th century. The new education system drafted by the East India Company emphasized Western culture at the expense of Indian cultures. The East India Company was also involved in supporting the activities of Protestant missionaries in India, particularly after 1813. These missionaries frequently expressed anti-Hindu sentiments in line with their Christian ways of thinking. Hindu reform movements. In response to company rule in India and the dominance of Western culture, Hindu reform movements developed, propagating societal and religious reforms, exemplifying what Percival Spear has called Neo-Vedanta, also called neo-Hinduism, is a central theme in these reform movements. The earliest of these reform movements was Ram Mohan Roy's BRAHMO SAMAJ, who strived toward a purified and monotheistic Hinduism. Major proponents. Neo-Vedanta's main proponents are the leaders of the BRAHMO SAMAJ, especially Ram Mohan Roy is the main proponents of neo-Hinduism. Ram Mohan Roy and the BRAHMO SAMAJ. The BRAHMO SAMAJ was the first of the 19th century reform movements. Its founder, Ram Mohan Roy 1772–1833, strived toward a universalistic interpretation of Hinduism. He rejected Hindu mythology, but also the Christian Trinity. He found that Unitarianism came closest to true Christianity and had a strong sympathy for the Unitarians. He founded a missionary committee in Calcutta and in 1828 asked for support for missionary activities from the American Unitarians. By 1829, Roy had abandoned the Unitarian Committee, but after Roy's death, the BRAHMO SAMAJ kept close ties to the Unitarian Church, who strived towards a rational faith, social reform, and the joining of these two in a renewed religion. The Unitarians were closely connected to the Transcendentalists, who were interested in and influenced by Indian religions early on. Ramo and Roy's ideas were altered considerably by Debendranath Tagore, who had a romantic approach to the development of these new doctrines and questioned central Hindu beliefs like reincarnation and karma and rejected the authority of the Vedas. Tagore also brought this neo-Hinduism closer in line with Western esotericism, a development which was furthered by Keshab Chandra Sen, was influenced by Transcendentalism and American philosophical religious movements strongly connected with Unitarianism, which emphasized personal religious experience over mere reasoning and theology. Sen strived to an accessible, non-renunciatory, everyman type of spirituality, introducing lay systems of spiritual practice which can be regarded as prototypes of the kind of yoga exercises which Vivekananda popularized in the West. The theology of the BRAHMO SAMAJ was called Neo-Vedanta by Christian commentators, who partly admired for their courage in abandoning traditions of polytheism and image worship, but whom they also scorned for having proffered to other Hindus a viable alternative to conversion. Critics accused classical Vedanta of being cosmic self-infatuation and ethical nihilism. BRAHMO SAMAJ leaders responded to such attacks by redefining the Hindu path to liberation, making the Hindu path available to both genders and all castes, incorporating notions of democracy and worldly improvement. Gandhi 1869-1948 has become a worldwide hero of tolerance and striving toward freedom. In his own time, he objected to the growing forces of Indian nationalism, communalism, and the subaltern response. Gandhi saw religion as a uniting force, confessing the equality of all religions. He synthesized theistic, Nastika, and Semitic religions, promoting an inclusive culture for peaceful living. Gandhi pled for a new hermeneutics of Indian scriptures and philosophy, observing that there are ample religious literature both in Astika and Nastika religions supporting for a pluralistic approach to religious and cultural diversity. The orthodox Advaita Vedanta and the heterodox Jain concept Aikantavalda provided him concepts for an integral approach to religious pluralism. He regarded Advaita as a universal religion dharma which could unite both the orthodox and nationalistic religious interpretations as the subaltern alternatives. Hereby Gandhi offers an interpretation of Hindutva which is basically different from the Sangh Parivar interpretation. The concept of Aikantavalda offered Gandhi an axiom that truth is many-sided and relative. It is a methodology to counter exclusivism or absolutism propounded by many religious interpretations. It has the capability of synthesizing different perceptions of reality. In Gandhi's view, Aikantavalda also gives room to an organic understanding of spatio-temporal process that is a daily world and its continued change. The doctrine of Aikantavalda is a plea for samvada, dialogue, and an objection against proselytizing activities. ANANDAMAYI was a major force in the further popularization of Neo-Vedanta. As a schoolboy, ANANDAMAYI was inspired by Vivekananda's lectures, in which he found an ennobling vision of truth and harmony as well as a message of Indian pride. She was educated by Christian missionaries and wrote a master thesis on Vedanta and ethics. She presented her view of Hinduism as the view of Hinduism. Central in his presentation was the claim that religion is fundamentally a kind of experience, anubhava, reducing religion to the core experience of reality in its fundamental unity. For ANANDAMAYI, Vedanta was the essence and bedrock of religion. Nationalism. Vivekananda occupies a very important place in the development of Indian nationalism as well as Hindu nationalism, and has been called the prophet of nationalism, pleading for a Hindu regeneration. According to S.N. Sen, his motto "Rise, awake, and do not stop until the goal is reached" had a strong appeal for millions of Indians. According to Bijay Misra, a private blogger. Social activism. According to Bijay Misra, a private blogger. Unity of Hinduism. Neo-Vedanta aims to present Hinduism as a homogenized ideal of Hinduism with Advaita Vedanta as its central doctrine. It presents Neo-Vedanta was influenced by Oriental scholarship, which portrayed Hinduism as a single-world religion and denigrated the heterogeneity of Hindu beliefs and practices as distortions of the basic teachings of Vedanta. Universalism. Following Ramakrishna, Neo-Vedanta regards all religions to be equal past deliberation, but also gives a special place to Hinduism as the ultimate universal religion. The various religious faiths of the world are regarded to help people to attain God realization, the experience of God, or the ultimate. According to some authors, this is expressed in the Rig Veda. Truth is one, only it is called by different names. The Ramakrishna/Vivekananda movement has these concepts to popular awareness in India and the West. An example is Aldous Huxley's book, The Perennial Philosophy, in which are gathered quotes from the religions of the world that express, for him, the universality of religion by showing the same fundamental truths are found in each of the world's religions. Vedanta and non-dualism. According to Benavides, Neo-Vedanta is closer to Ramanuja's qualified non-dualism than it is to Shankara Advaita Vedanta. Nicholas Fahrenheit. June notes that Neo-Vedanta does not regard the world to be illusionary in contrast to Shankara's Advaita. According to Michael Taft, Ramakrishna reconciled the dualism of formless and form. Ramakrishna regarded the Supreme Being to be both personal and impersonal, active and inactive. According to Anil Sukla, Vivekananda's Neo-Advaita reconciles Dvaita or dualism and Advaita or non-dualism. Radhakrishnan acknowledged the reality and diversity of the world of experience, which he saw as grounded in and supported by the Absolute or Brahman. Radhakrishnan also reinterpreted Shankara's notion of Maya. According to Radhakrishnan, Maya is not a strict absolute idealism, but a subjective misperception of the world as ultimately real. Gandhi endorsed the Jain concept of Ainkantavada, the notion that truth and reality are perceived differently from diverse points of view, and that no single point of view is the complete truth. This concept embraces the perspectives of both Vedanta, which, according to Jainism, recognizes substances but not process, and Buddhism, which recognizes process but not substance. Jainism, on the other hand, pays equal attention to both substance drava and process pariya. According to Sama, who stands in the tradition of Nisargadatta Maharaj, Advaita Vedanta means spiritual non-dualism or absolutism, in which opposites are manifestations of the absolute, which itself is immanent and transcendent. SRUTI versus experience. A central concern in Neo-Vedanta is the role of SRUTI, sacred text, versus personal experience. Classical Advaita Vedanta is centered on the correct understanding of SRUTI, the sacred text. Correct understanding of the SRUTI is a pramana, a means of knowledge to attain liberation. It takes years of preparation and study to accomplish this task, and includes the mastery of Sanskrit, the memorization of texts, and the meditation over the interpretation of those texts. Understanding is called anubhava, knowledge or understanding derived from personal experience. Anubhava removes avidya, ignorance regarding Brahman and Atman, and leads to moksha, liberation. In Neo-Vedanta, the status of SRUTI becomes secondary and personal experience itself becomes the primary means to liberation. SMARTA tradition. According to Ninian Smart, Neo-Vedanta is largely a SMARTA account. In modern times, SMARTA views have been highly influential in both the Indian and Western understanding of Hinduism. According to ISKCON.org, Vithispara notes adherence of SMARTA Brahmins to the pan-Indian Sanskrit Brahmanical tradition. The majority of members of SMARTA community follow the Advaita Vedanta philosophy of Shankara. SMARTA and Advaita have become almost synonymous, though not all Advaitins are SMARTas. Shankara was a SMARTA, just like Radhakrishnan. SMARTas believe in the essential oneness of 5 Panchadhara or 6 Yamata deities as personifications of the Supreme. According to Smartism, Supreme Reality, Brahman, transcends all of the various forms of personal deity. God is both Saguna and Nirguna. Lola Williamson further notes that what is called Vedic in the Smarta tradition and in much of Hinduism is essentially tantric in its range of deities and liturgical forms. Influence. Neo-Vedanta was popularized in the 20th century in both India and the West by Vivekananda, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, and Western Orientalists who regarded Vedanta to be the central theology of Hinduism. Vedanticization. Neo-Vedanta has become a broad current in Indian culture, extending far beyond the Dashanami Sampradaya, the Advaita Vedanta Sampradaya founded by Adi Shankara. The influence of Neo-Vedanta on Indian culture has been called Vedanticization by Richard King. An example of this Vedanticization is Ramana Maharshi, who is regarded as one of the greatest Hindu saints of modern times, of whom Shaman notes that among all the major figures of modern Hinduism is the one person who is widely regarded as a Jivamukti. Although Sharma admits that Ramana was not acquainted with Advaita Vedanta before his personal experience of liberation, and Ramana never received initiation into the Dashanami Sampradaya or any other Sampradaya, Sharma nevertheless sees Ramana's answers to questions by devotees as being within an Advaita Vedanta framework. Diversity and pluralism. In response to the developments in India during the colonial era and Western critiques of Hinduism, various visions on Indian diversity and unity have been developed within the nationalistic and reform movements. The BRAHMO SAMAJ strive towards monotheism, while no longer regarding the Vedas as sole religious authority. The BRAHMO SAMAJ had a strong influence on the Neo-Vedanta of Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Radhakrishnan and Gandhi, who strive toward a modernized, humanistic Hinduism with an open eye for societal problems and needs. Other groups, like the Arya Samaj, strive toward a revival of Vedic authority. In this context, various responses toward India's diversity developed. Hindu inclusivism, HINDUTVA, and dharmic religions. In modern times, the orthodox measure of the primacy of the Vedas has been joined with the grand narrative of the Vedic origins of Hinduism. The exclusion of Jainism and Buddhism excludes a substantial part of India's cultural and religious history from the assertion of a strong and positive Hindu identity. Hindutva ideology solves this problem by taking recourse to the notion of Hindutva Hinduness, which includes Jainism and Buddhism. A recent strategy, exemplified by Rajiv Malhotra, is the use of the term Dharma as a common denominator, which also includes Jainism and Buddhism. According to Lawson, Malhotra's notion of the so-called Dharmic traditions and their integral unity is another example of neo-Hindu discourse. Malhotra, in his Being Different, uses the term Dharmic tradition or Dharmic systems, referring to all the Hindu, Buddhist, Jaina and Sikh traditions. He proposes that those traditions, despite their differences, share common features, the most important being Dharma. They are also characterized by the notion of integral unity, which means that ultimately only the whole exists. The parts that make up the whole have but a relative existence. The whole is independent and indivisible, as opposed to synthetic unity, which starts with parts that exist separately from one another. Malhotra has received strong criticism of his ideas for glossing over the differences between and even within the various traditions of India. In response, Malhotra explains that some of his critics confused integral unity with homogeneity, thinking that Malhotra said all those traditions are essentially the same, when he actually wrote that dharmic traditions share a sense of an integral unity despite differences. Inclusivism and communalism. According to Reinhardt, Neo-Vedanta is a theological scheme for subsuming religious difference under the aegis of Vedantic truth. According to Reinhardt, the consequence of this line of reasoning is communalism, the idea that all people belonging to one religion have common economic, social and political interests, and these interests are contrary to the interests of those belonging to another religion. Communalism has become a growing force in Indian politics, presenting several threats to India, hindering its nation-building and threatening the secular, democratic character of the Indian state. Reinhardt notes that Hindu religiosity plays an important role in the nationalist movement, and that the neo-Hindu discourse is the unintended consequence of the initial moves made by thinkers like Ram Mohan Roy and Vivekananda. But Reinhardt also points out that it is influence on Western spirituality. Neo-Vedanta has been influenced by Western ideas, but has also had a reverse influence on Western spirituality. Due to the colonization of Asia by the Western world. Since the late 18th century, an exchange of ideas has been taking place between the Western world and Asia, which also influenced Western religiosity. In 1785 appeared the first Western translation of a Sanskrit text. It marked the growing interest in the Indian culture and languages. The first translation of Upanishads appeared in two parts in 1801 and 1802, which influenced author Schopenhauer, who called them the consolation of my life. Early translations also appeared in other European languages. A major force in the mutual influence of Eastern and Western ideas and religiosity was the Theosophical Society. It searched for ancient wisdom in the East, spreading Eastern religious ideas in the West. One of its salient features was the belief in masters of wisdom, beings human or once human, who have transcended the normal frontiers of knowledge, and who make their wisdom available to others. The Theosophical Society also spread Western ideas in the East, aiding a modernization of Eastern traditions and contributing to a growing nationalism in the Asian colonies. Another major influence was Vivekananda, who popularized his modernized interpretation of Advaita Vedanta in the 19th and early 20th century in both India and the West, emphasizing Anubhava personal experience of a scriptural authority. Appraisal. According to Larson, the solution of synthesis prevailed in the work of Ram Mohan Rai, Sayyid Ahmed Khan, Rabbi Indranath Tagore, Swami Vivekananda, M.K. Gandhi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Muhammad Iqbal V.D. Savarkar, Jawaharlal Nehru, and many others. Spearvoss's appraisal of this solution of synthesis, while G.R. Sharma emphasizes the humanism of Neo-Vedanta. Criticism. Vivekananda's presentation of Advaita Vedanta has been criticized for its misinterpretation of this tradition. According to Anand Rambashan, Vivekananda emphasized Anubhava personal experience over scriptural authority, but in his interpretation of Shankara, deviated from Shankara, who saw knowledge and understanding of the scriptures as the primary means to moksha. According to Commons, the emphasis on samadhi also is not to be found in the Upanishads nor with Shankara. For Shankara, meditation and nirvikalpa samadhi are means to gain knowledge of the already existing unity of Brahman and Atman. In the 21st century, Neo-Vedanta has been criticized by Hindu traditionalists for the influence of radical universalism, arguing that it leads to self-defeating philosophical relativism and has weakened the status and strength of Hinduism. Criticism of Paul Hacker. In the 20th century, the German Indologist Paul Hacker used the terms Neo-Vedanta and neo-Hinduism polemically to criticize modern Hindu thinkers. Halvaus regards the terms Neo-Vedanta and neo-Hinduism as useful and legitimate as convenient labels, but has criticized Hacker for use that was simplistic. Furthermore, he asks, Halvaus wrote that the adoption of the terms Bakshi and Adlery argue that German Indology, including Hacker, was merely a barely disguised form of religious evangelism. According to Malhotra, an Indian-American Hindu writer, it was Paul Hacker who popularized the term neo-Hinduism in the 1950s to refer to the modernization of Hinduism brought about by many Indian thinkers, the most prominent being Swami Vivekananda. In Malhotra's view, Hacker charged that neo-Hindus, most notably Vivekananda, have disingenuously adopted Western ideas and expressed them using Sanskrit. Malhotra also notes that Hacker was a biased Christian apologist. According to David Smith, Hacker's belief was that the ethical values of neo-Hinduism came from Western philosophy and Christianity, just in Hindu terms. Hacker also believed that Hinduism began in the 1870s. He saw Bankim Chattopadhyay, Aurobindo Gandhi, and Radhakrishnan as its most famous proponents. Neglect of inherent development of religions. Brian Kelvin. Smith notes that the neo-Hindu indigenous authorities are often dismissed as inauthentic, their claims to legitimacy compromised by their encounters with modernity, which influenced their worldview and religious positions, but points out that, according to Madhya, the notion that Vivekananda and other Hindu modernists deviate from orthodox classical Advaita Vedanta neglects the fact that considerable developments took place in Indian religious thinking, including Advaita Vedanta. The myth of neo-Hinduism. Rajiv Malhotra, in his book Indra's Net, has stated that there is a myth of neo-Hinduism. According to him, there are 8 myths of neo-Hinduism, such as German Indologist biases were turned into Hinduism. Myth 2 and Hinduism was manufactured and did not grow organically. Myth 3. Malhotra denies that Vivekananda manufactured Hinduism, or that Neo-Vedanta suppressed the traditions of the Indian masses. According to Malhotra, there is an integrated, unified spiritual substratum in ancient India, and argues that, according to Malhotra, the myth of neo-Hinduism is used to fragment Hindu society by pitting its spiritual giants against one another and distorting their subtle and deeply intricate viewpoints. Also, according to him, the definition of neo-Hinduism has been contrived and gained authenticity, in part because it suits certain academic and political agendas, and in part because it has been reiterated extensively without adequate critical response.